Okay, so today we're starting a new mini-series in our biblical metaphysical studies and calling it the Metaphysics of Christmas. And we're going to begin with a test. So that's what this paper, those blank sheets of paper there are for. And the idea being that we all have our Christmas story that is personal to us. Right, because we've heard the stories, we've seen Charlie Brown Christmas, we've gone to churches and had the stories read to us, and we've seen how the Grinch stole Christmas and all those different stories that come up this time of year. And so what you want to do is we're only going to spend about 5 or 6 minutes because we don't have a lot of time today. So we'll just 5 or 6 minutes to just jot down the people, the places, the circumstances, who was doing what and why of the Christmas story, and then we'll get into talking about the metaphysics of all these characters and events. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this for a moment. Okay, so we've written down the key elements to the story that we remember. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through the story in a sort of a chronological order. It's told in two different ways in Matthew and Luke. There's actually two different stories, but we have blended them together into one story. And so I'm going to do that today and go through and talk about the metaphysics of each character and each event and the people involved. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end that you can say, oh, what about this or what about that? And, get some clarity on something that maybe. So this exercise that we just went into about writing down what we remember about the story is to, these are the elements that somehow for some reason were important to us, that are meaningful to us. And we can look at the ones that we remembered, and we can also look at the ones that we didn't remember and think, okay, so how is that showing up or not showing up in my life? So this handout that I've given you, the Metaphysics of Christmas, is the main story elements. I talk about how every person, place, story, and event mentioned in the Bible represents some aspect of our own individual consciousness. And in my words, the Bible is the story of our soul's unfoldment. So the stories. This is a story from the beginning of Genesis up through the Revelation, is the story of our soul's unfoldment, our own individual process. So as the philosophers say that, and I can't remember the saying right offhand, but anyway, that our lives imitate the life of the whole family of man, and so we. If you look in the womb as the fetus is developing, it has its reptilian stage and its amphibian stage, and then it becomes becomes into a mammal. Actually, at one point, it actually has gills, and so we individually are having the whole experience, the totality throughout. And so the stories in the Bible. If we look at them as our journey and not just his story or the story of the awareness of God in our activities or as history, it's also mystery, and that mystery has to do with its relationship to ourselves. So we can see ourselves in all these elements, and we'll go into that a little bit more now. The Christmas story is recorded in the Gospels according to Matthew and of Luke. And then we also have additional traditions that we've tagged onto the holiday. And this story represents the birth of a new level of awareness, the Christ consciousness. And in Unity, we look at the Christ as being that infinite, perfect pattern and potential for being. That's really kind of my terminology. It's the perfection of man, if you will. And that Jesus was the human who became Jesus Christ, who expressed that Christ potential to the greatest extent that we have known in this life wave so far. We know we can talk about the stories of Buddha and Krishna and other spiritual individuals, spiritual leaders in other religions, and they have similar qualities as well. And so they're all symbolic of that infinite pattern potential for being. And so through an understanding of the spiritual or metaphysical meaning of the symbols presented in these stories, we can discern for ourselves the process by which we birth the Christ level of consciousness in our own being. And then I have a listing of some of the key elements and the metaphysical interpretation from the Revealing Word, which if you haven't got this in your library, or the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, you definitely want to have these in your library to refer to when you're doing biblical interpretation. And so that's for you to take home, and I've got my notes here that I'm going to read from as we go through this. So the story, as it begins, we have Herod the king. It begins with the genealogies. Both Matthew and Luke begin with a genealogy that brings us down to the birth of Jesus, and then it goes into the story about how at this time we have Herod as the king. Now the king, especially Herod, we call it the egocentric ego. So the king is the ruling aspect in consciousness. And the earthly kings are ones that are caught up with earthly stuff. And then we have the coming of the King of the Jews, Jesus, who is the ruling consciousness in spirit and in our intellect. And so Herod represents that egocentric ego. And whenever the egocentric ego is challenged, it wants to kill the source of its challenge, right? So when the wise men come and tell him about the birth of the King of the Jews, he's like, the first thing he wants to do is get rid of them. So this all happens in Judea. Judea is the more modern term for the kingdom of Judah, which when the kingdom was divided back in the 8th century BC, after the rule of Solomon, two of his sons one was king of the northern kingdoms, the 10 tribes of the north that made up Israel, and then there was Judah and Benjamin, were the tribes of the south that were the kingdom of Judah, that were ruled by one of Solomon's son, and the other, Rehoboam, and then Jeroboam ruled the north. And the northern 10 kingdoms are the 10 lost tribes of Israel, because they were taken off and dispersed. So Judea comes from the word Judah. It's a more modern term, Judea. And Judah literally means the praise of Jehovah. Judah was the eldest son of Jacob, of Israel. And it literally means the praise of Jehovah. So here we have the egocentric ego in the midst of this consciousness of praise of God, of Yahweh, of the I am consciousness. And the first part of this story documents a very miraculous conception. And the first one is that of Zechariah and Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth is Mary's cousin. Zechariah was the high priest, and Zechariah literally means I have been, or Yahweh or Jehovah has remembered me or has penetrated me. It's a spiritual consciousness. He's high priest of the temple. And his wife, Elizabeth, they're both beyond childbearing age. And an angel comes to Zechariah in the temple and tells him that that they're going to give birth, that they're going to have a child. And he laughs. And because he laughs, he is struck dumb. He's not able to talk until the birth of his son, which is John, which comes to become known as John the Baptist. And so Zechariah, Elizabeth and Mary were cousins, so that makes Jesus and John cousins. And Zechariah, that spiritual consciousness, doesn't speak until the child is born, until it comes into manifestation. So we have this divine birth occurring, and the spiritual consciousness at that point says his name is John. They were asking what his name was. Are they going to name him after somebody in the family? He says, no, we're going to name him John, because that's what I was told to call him. And Elizabeth, his wife, who the women of generally represent some soul quality or quality of our feeling nature, feminine or love consciousness. And the name literally means God is my oath. And so we have two individuals, two aspects of ourselves, that oath of God and the consciousness of God or Spirit, that are leading the way. Now, John the Baptist led the way, prepared the way for Jesus and his ministry. So if we look ahead, we can see how, he was 6 months older, because we know that when Mary came to visit Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was in her 6th month at the time that Mary came and told her of this visit by the angel Gabriel. So Gabriel comes to Mary and tells her that she is going to give birth, and she says, "How is this to be? I have never known a man." And she says, "Well, the Holy Spirit will come to you, and you shall conceive, and his name shall be Emmanuel," which literally means God with us. Now, did they call him Emmanuel? Well, no. They called him Jesus. But Emmanuel is that awareness of the Christ within. It's that Christ presence within us. It's that God part of us that is within each one of us. It's Emmanuel. E being from Elohim or El, which is one of the names for God. The essence of God is the same root word as Al for Allah or El for Elohim. It's the same, comes from the same Arabic root word. Some pronounce it Al, some pronounce it El. So Gabriel is an angel, a messenger from God, that God speaks to us directly through the angels. Angels are messengers from God. So if we're driving down the road and we see a billboard and we get some kind of message from God from that billboard, that's an angel. Or if somebody is talking to us and we're having a conversation and we wake up to some spiritual aspect of ourselves, then this person or this conversation is an angel. It's a direct message from God. It comes in many different shapes and forms. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, the feminine, again, the soul quality of feelings, literally means to be freed, exalted, and that the Mary, the mother of Jesus, is that soul that magnifies the Lord daily in the temple. She was of a group of young ladies who were preparing themselves. They were called handmaids of the Lord. She calls herself the handmaid of the Lord because they were preparing themselves. There was this belief that the Messiah was going to come, and that would come to a young woman, and so there was young women that were preparing themselves, and she was chosen to this birth. So it's in that preparation, that soul quality of preparation, of exalting God in ourselves, that prepares the way, that prepares the soil, if you will, of consciousness to birth this new level of awareness. Now, of course, Mary, had the Holy Spirit to come upon her. The Holy Spirit is that whole Spirit of God. That's one of the easiest things. That's, I love the simple, easy definitions. If we just think in terms of the whole Spirit of God within each one of us. So it's all that God can be. I can remember when I was young and in the Episcopal Church, and there was a bishop who came one Sunday and gave this talk, and I was tired of Sunday school already and told him I wanted to be in the main service, and he gave this talk, and the only thing I remember from that talk is he talked about Jesus being all of God that God could put in the form of a man, and that's kind of the conception that Jesus, and we all are all of God that God could put in the form of man. The difference between us and Jesus is a level of consciousness. He was consciously aware of that. Kind of like we talk about if I had faith as a seed, as a mustard seed. Well, the mustard seed knows it's a mustard seed, so it's going to be a mustard plant. We're God seeds. We are expressions of God. We are the seed of God into this realm, but we don't believe it. We believe we're something less than that. And and Jesus was conscious of himself being a God seed, and so express that as well as anyone else has. So the Holy Spirit, that whole activity of God in the universal sense, Spirit is breath, life, essence, light, divine, Again, the angel of the Lord, that quickening thought of God appearing in the form of intelligence. And Joseph is called a son of David. David was a type of Christ. David symbolizes the love faculty, the 12 power essence of love, which in the New Testament is John, the disciple John. It's an aspect of the Christ. And David was a type of Christ. He was an anointed one. He was a Messiah. The Messiah or Mashiach in the Hebrew literally means the anointed one. And Saul and David and Cyrus of Persia and others were the anointed. They were early examples of that Christ in expression. And Jesus is the son of David, the Christ. So Joseph, which literally means that Yah will add to. Joseph, I believe, is essentially the same name as Jacob and in Jesus. That God is our salvation, God is our Savior, God will add to us. And then Joseph and Mary together symbolize wisdom and love. And it's through this balancing of wisdom and love that we bring forth the divine into manifestation. So it's not just through our intellect and it's not just through our feeling, but it's through a bringing these together. Now in the Gospel of John, as we talked about not too long ago, the first sign, the first miracle was the turning of the water to wine at the wedding in Cana. Wedding symbolizing bringing together those dominant states of consciousness, the acceptive and the accepting and the assertive, the male, the female, all those different aspects of consciousness, the intellect and the feeling, the wisdom and the love. So when we bring those together, then we're beginning that process of preparing the soil, if you will, for that God seed to to take place within us, to get situated within us, to take hold and grow. They were from Nazareth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Nazareth literally means a branch, an offshoot. And metaphysically, it's a common place that it's in the mediocre mind that the Christ truth is received and expressed. This is critical. Nobody is too stupid or too dumb to receive divine inspiration, but some of us are too smart. Some of us, we're too smart. We got it figured out. And it's only when we enter into a Nazareth or a mediocre state of mind and get humble, if you will, that I'm not there yet. So there's got to be something that needs to change. And what needs to change is my belief that I'm in charge, right? I think that I'm in charge, that I'm going to make things happen, that I'm going to, that's the egocentric ego. That's the Herod consciousness within us that says that I'm in charge and I'm going to make things happen and I'm going to kill off anything that gets in my way. And we see that out picturing every day on the news. And that's as far as I want to go with that. But we know that it's egocentric egos who say, I am the way, that I know what's right for everybody, and I'm the only one who can do this, and all those kinds of things that we hear from all the different people out there, or that I know better than you. John the Baptist is born about 6 months before Jesus is born. John symbolizes love, consciousness. John the Baptist is that illumined intellect, zealous for the rule of spirit. And so what precedes the birth of the Christ in awareness is that birth for the love of spirit, for the righteousness, the right use of our consciousness. It's not about me being right and you being wrong, or you being wrong and I being right. It's about the right use of our consciousness, the right use of our faculties, the right use of our powers of being. The right use is for the glory of all, which is the glory of God, not for the glory of me. If it's for the glory of me, then I'm missing the mark. I am sinning. This all happens during the reign of Caesar Augustus. Again, he's the rulership it implies the joint activity of reason and will. Augustus literally means worship of will, of ruling and sense consciousness. Caesar, again, is like a king, or it's that it's that ruling aspect of consciousness, the egocentric ego. And during the time of Quirinius, who literally means peace by force, armed peace, a civil government. So Quirinius is the governor, and but it's peace by force. It's not peace by mutual agreement. It's not peace by divine order, but by civil order or armed peace. This happens in Syria, which is a highland, a swelling up, an intellectual pride. Galilee, which literally means rolling, energy of life, activity. And it happens in Bethlehem. So we have this journey of Mary and Joseph, who are from Nazareth, and there's the census that's happening. So we have this civil activity that's occurring. So in the midst of this civil activity, so Mary and Joseph, those spiritually illumined beings of wisdom and love, are acquiescing, are following the rule of law, and working within the system, if you will, and going to Bethlehem to partake in the census. We know now that we have no records of there being a census at this time, and they wouldn't have had to have traveled to to Bethlehem. There was no record of people having to go anywhere to be part of the census. But the story was designed in this way, was created to prove a point. So why is it that they had to travel? Why did they have to? Well, because he is believed to have been from Nazareth. And why do we think he was from Nazareth? Well, at one point he's called a Nazarene. And a Nazarene is a thought that belongs to negative consciousness. Nazarenes. Now, Samson was a Nazarene. He was, he didn't cut his hair. He didn't take strong drink. There were people who were Nazarenes. It's like in the Catholic Church now. Families, often the eldest was dedicated to God and went into the priesthood. This was like dedicating your oldest to God and dedicating them to the priesthood. And so Nazarenes were ones who would not take shears to their heads, would not cut their hair, and or beards, and also would not take strong drink or spicy food. There was a whole so it's someone dedicated to God. So we have this story where they say, well, okay, so if he's a Nazarene, he must have come from Nazareth, not knowing what a Nazarene was. He must have come from Nazareth. So we have this trip going to Bethlehem, and so that's one of the reasons why we have, as far as a historical basis. But spiritually, why did we have to create this story of travail in the 9th month of pregnancy, that we go from Nazareth, which is in Galilee, in Syria, in this lesser than, it was not in Judea. They were coming from Samaria to Judea. Samaritans were a lesser breed. There's a comment in there that says, can anything good come from Galilee, which is near Nazareth? It's part of that same area. And, so he was called a Galilean later on because most of his followers came from Galilee. And so we had to have this journey from the dark side, if you will, from the negative to Bethlehem, which is Bethlehem literally means a house of bread or a house of substance. So it's coming from lack consciousness to a consciousness of abundance. So, but even in the midst of the consciousness of abundance, what do we find? Well, there's no room for them in the inn, is there? So they have to end up in the manger, and look at the spiritual significance of that. The inn is where commerce was happening, where people were coming and they were bargaining, and for food and trading goods, and merchants would stay at the inn, and so the Christ cannot be born within that consciousness of the mercantile, within that worldly consciousness. It had to be in the manger. The manger it's symbolic of that humble. Once again, the humbleness of spirit that's born within our humility, within our humbleness, and not within our grandiosity, not within the egocentric ego, but in the spiritually conscious awareness of the spiritual ego, that ego that is open to spirit. And so he's born in the manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes, called the firstborn son, the personal I. So I versus I am, that I am. So the name of God, as we're told in the Old Testament, is the I am that I am. It's that consciousness of being. And that the name of God is I am. So within us, our consciousness of being, that spiritual awareness, is the God within us. And then the firstborn son is the I. It's the personal expression of that consciousness, or of that totality of being. So he's wrapped in swaddling clothes, and the shepherds have angels coming to them. So first we have the shepherds out in the fields. The shepherds are tending the sheep. The shepherds are that part of our consciousness which we can call the oversoul, or the what's another name for that? That part of us which is aware that we are thinking, that we have thoughts and feelings. That part of us which transcends our thoughts and feelings, and can choose and guide and direct our thoughts and feelings. And of course, the sheep that are the thoughts and the feelings, that aspect of us, which all that mental activity that's going on within us. And so the shepherds are those protecting entities, the angels, if you will, coming to the shepherds, spiritual guidance, directing our oversoul, directing our oh shoot, how come I'm not coming up with the other names? There's about a half dozen different names I could think of that talk about the same aspect of consciousness, which is conscious that we are conscious. And so this aspect that is conscious that we are conscious gets the message first and comes and welcomes and honors and exalts and praises this Christ level of awareness which has come in. It's something new. It's something greater than the sheep that we have been tending for so long. It's something which is above and beyond that earthly level of understanding, but a consciousness of spirit, of God, of ultimate reality that has come into our being. Okay, within this house of substance, within Bethlehem. And then we have the story of the wise men coming to Herod. They see the star in the east, and the star is that first awakening before realizing Christ's wisdom and peace. So the wise men are that stored up resources of the soul that rise to the surface by a great spiritual revelation. They're stirred into activity. When we have these divine ideas, these divine awarenesses, there's that aspect of consciousness, those soul aspects that come forward that are wise, that have these spiritual gifts to give us. We draw from collective consciousness, the collective unconscious, that realm of the unconscious, which is superconscious, conscious of the divine. We've been operating on a subconscious level, on a lesser than, and now we draw forth a higher than consciousness. We start tapping into the Akashic records. We start tapping into the wisdom of the ages. That's with the wise men coming from the east, which is the within, the spiritual nature. So the east symbolizes the within, the spiritual nature, the star that waking up that happens in the east. And so calling forth the wisdom to go to Jerusalem, which is habitation of peace, despite the fact that it's the seat of the government. It's also the city of David, and which symbolizes love once again. And they meet with Herod, that egocentric ego, who asks the question, now why is it that the wise men were able to see the star? And when we think of, the nativity scenes and, the pictures that we have of this bright, beautiful star up in the sky, how come it was that the wise men could see it, but they come to Herod and he and all of his advisors have no idea what they're talking about?
Because they're all in sense consciousness.
Because they're all caught up in sense consciousness. They're not seeing the signs. So the wise men are seeing something that is in the signs. Whether it was in the stars, they might have been astrologers, and so they were reading the star patterns, which at that particular time, about 6 BC, there was a conjunction of, 5 of the 7 visible planets creating sort of a star pattern, if you will, or a star pattern. They were in an alignment, and we've only seen that. We saw that we've actually seen it a couple of times in the 80s, and then again, I think about 5 years ago in 2012, I think it was. We saw a similar. So, have we had another birth of a special child that we don't know about? Well, we'll find out here, hopefully pretty soon. So the wise men, so the egocentric ego is not open and receptive to the guidance of spirit, and so they were unable. He was unable to see the star, but they could read the Old Testament, which mentioned something about the city of David, and so they head off to Bethlehem. And as soon as they leave Jerusalem, they see the star once again, and that leads them it says by this time they've moved into a house. So they go to the house where Mary and Joseph are living, and they present gifts. Now, how many wise men were there?
3.
Well, from the story, we don't know. It doesn't say how many, but there were 3 gifts, and so because there were 3 gifts, we say there were 3 wise men. I guess that makes sense, but we don't know for sure. But there were 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold symbolizes the spiritual gifts, the riches of spirit. Frankincense, of course, is an incense, the transmutation of the material world into the spiritual. So when we light the incense, the smoke rises up, and often people like to use incense, especially in Eastern religions and even in Western spiritual practices, lighting incense and allowing that smoke to rise up. So it's symbolic of our prayers and our praise and thanksgiving going up to spirit, going up to God. And then myrrh is an herb that was used by the Egyptians in their embalming practices. And it symbolizes the eternality of spirit. It's used as a preservative, kind of like salt, but without the corrosive effects of salt. And so they give their gifts, and they tell of Herod, who is plotting, and they decide to go down into Egypt, which Egypt we often talk about as the darkness of sense consciousness, the realm of substance, life in the depths of body consciousness. It's the subjective, the subconscious. And so there's this necessity that once that Christ spirit is born, it's still a baby, it's still an infant, right? And it has to have a time of preparation, of growth, to infuse. It's people who we get inspired by the Spirit, and we go out and we're going to save the world, right? And we get beaten down. It happens over and over again. Well, it takes time for that to really build up in consciousness until we have the strength that it's totally infused within us. And it took a period of time, and we know it was 12 years before they visited the temple, and he was at the age of 30 before he began his ministry. And there's a lot of other interesting details that we could be talking about, but I did want to leave a few minutes for us for any questions, comments, anything in your personal stories that we didn't cover, that we didn't go over, anything in there that you brought out. I mean, we could talk about things like the Christmas tree and the date of the 25th and all these different traditions that have come from other religions. Actually, the date of the 25th was the birth of Mithras. It was celebrated, hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus, as the coming of the light bearer, the sons of light, etc.
Very significant to the animals that were.
The animals that were there. Well, it was in a manger, and there really aren't any mentions of animals. I believe I may be just right off the top of my head, other than the shepherds tending their sheep, and whether they brought but it was in a manger. It was in the barn. So the thought is that there would be animals, but animals represent really those unregenerated life forces, aspects of our being that have not been truly taken into consciousness, that are unconscious. It's symbolic, like of our reptilian brain and those aspects of us that are instinctive. Our heart beats, we breathe, and we don't think about breathing. We don't think about, beat, 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 beat. We're not telling our heart to beat, but there's that part of our brain which is telling our heart to beat. It's those, and metaphysically in our consciousness, it's unregenerated life forces that, we can bring into the regeneration with us. So next week, we'll look at the stories in Luke and the stories in Matthew, and it's a session which I call Vive la différence. Vive la différence. So we'll emphasize the different stories and why they were told that way, and how that relates to us. So thank you all for being here today.